interaction directly. Nathan, when did you become aware of Kurt's work?
I think I found Kurt's work around 2019, so it's been 6 or 7 years.
Right.
I attended my first Natural Law Institute, or at that time Proprietarian
Hmm.
Institute event in 2020 in Richmond, Virginia, which was quite an interesting experience. But I've been associated with the Natural Law Institute since that time, and have learned a tremendous amount from Kurt's work, as well as the work of the other members of the institute,
Right.
Noah Ravoy, Luke Weinhagen, everybody involved, including you.
Right.
And I've been to several events, and have it's it's really life changing work for many people, including me.
Hmm. Well, today we want to talk about your latest project, which is called Practical Mastery, or rather the thing that the project points at. And before we do so, though, I'd have you instead start off with explaining a little bit how you came to be involved in this work, or how you chose that this would be something you would put energy into, and perhaps what in your life set you up to have that interest. So if you could say a little bit about that, that would be great.
So I've been involved in many fields throughout my life. You know, from playing music in high school. I've been a martial artist for a very long time. I spent time in the military. Um, I currently work in the medical field. I'm a physician assistant. So I've been through many different training processes and learning processes over time, and the observation that I made was that regardless of field, the actual process of mastery, of behavioral development and knowledge transmission, is consistent over time or throughout fields. So regardless of what field, the actual process is identical, which is something that I hadn't come across before, and I found rather fascinating. So I started pursuing that, and determining if this observation was in fact correct. And it appears to be that the actual process itself, even regardless of whether you're talking about music or martial traditions or engineering or medicine, the actual process of learning those subjects, learning those fields, is identical.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've had an interest in this topic for a long time. I guess I started out uh, reading Nassim Taleb's Anti-Fragile back in 2012 when I was
Mhm.
involved in my first study program, Philosophy and Economics. And one of the premier insights I really gleaned from that was that the theory-only approach to learning that the universities tend to emphasize, uh, while quite stimulating and quite interesting, tends to not really give you skills that are generated from a practical engagement with a subject matter, and instead they prepare you to have access to a universe of facts, to a panoply of methods perhaps to determine things, but very little in the way of direct and practical application of these methods to real life or real world or real business or science problems, or perhaps even creative challenges. And so in the second study program that I attended, it was a more practically oriented one. It's something called a dual study program in Germany, and that's basically where you combine the university attendance with the with an internship or apprenticeship inside of a company. And so you rotate 3 months between working in the company and studying at the university. And by the end, you have both the degree and the 3 years of work experience, as well as the perspective to continue working in that company. Now, in my case, that didn't quite work out either. I dropped out of that as well and then went kind of full on into direct engagement with subject matter and direct kind of work in Chile when I joined an entrepreneurship boot camp and then stayed on the team thereafter. And that really was the time in my life where I'd say I had the most, the fastest and most intense engagement with the real world under real constraints, like resource constraints, time constraints, and as a consequence, I think also my learning was very accelerated. I was effectively asked or tasked to produce outcomes and given some support in doing so, but really I was given a responsibility to deliver something. And because it was a thing I wanted to do, and because it mattered to not only myself but to the team that I did, I ended up putting a lot of energy into it and then actually having some modest success. So all that is to say that in my own life, the arc from purely theoretical engagement with the subject matter through a kind of half and half approach into a full-on outcome driven approach. And I can tell you and I can tell the audience that the latter has at least made me feel like there is a faster progression and there is a deeper sense of accomplishment that comes along with doing something that has direct real world impact rather than, again, this kind of proxy measure. So have you had a similar kind of experience? Like, did you also go to university? Do you also have kind of these experiences of the difference between theoretical engagement and the practical engagement, or how did you?
Yes, certainly that's the case, and as it relates to the practical mastery methodology, this is a very traditional arc in that in many of these traditions, whether you're talking about military training or medieval guilds, the idea of some initial kind of theoretical training in a structured environment where the master teaches this is how we do things, combined with actual hands-on work is really one of the best ways to convey the knowledge. And it's very common for there to be theoretical or kind of academic knowledge first that is then starting to be applied in the practical terms. And as the person becomes more skilled, that hands-on practical application becomes more and more part of it, because you've already learned the theoretical, so then you can then apply it. And within the practical mastery structure, that beginning phase would be considered the apprentice phase, which tends to be much more structured. And then as you move more into the journeyman phase, where the structure is learned, you're using those skills in practical ways. You can start altering the structure as needed, or you understand the structure better and you develop discernment, so you learn when the structure needs to be applied strictly and when you might need to bend the rules a little bit for real world changes. And then as you move into that mastery phase, you really begin to embody the structure. The structure of the field, the structure of the subject, and it becomes sort of completely practical. But the theory then is integrated seamlessly within the actual physical expression or practical expression of that field, whatever it happens to be.
Right. And so in your project of practical mastery, you're emphasizing this element or this principle of structure.
Yes.
What is structure, and why does it matter to mastery?
So, structure is really the foundation of reliable behavioral development. Unfortunately, many of the behavioral development systems that you see today are based primarily on motivation or insight or emotional intensity, that grind harder school of doing things. But having a basic structure in place where activities are specifically defined, you do this at this time of day for this period of time, provides the ability to make those behavioral changes in a I prefer not use the word regimented, because I think that has some negative connotations for some people, although I don't think there's any problem with that. But it provides you with the ability to know exactly what you need to do, and by consistently doing those activities, doing those actions over time, you you reliably change the behavior and produce reliable results, and reproducible results. So the structure is the foundation upon which all the rest of the work gets built.
Right. And I assume that part of the reason for this fairly universal arc of starting out essentially replicating what the foundational skills are that the master or the field itself recognizes as valuable, then moving into the application of that to real world things, and then ultimately when you're arriving at a reliable ability to replicate outcomes, you end up having the ability to understand the principles and then creatively apply them or deny them in specific instances where there's another way I can do this, while kind of ignoring or seemingly ignoring things that the apprentice at the beginning thinks are essential to the process, because he hasn't
Right.
yet penetrated to understand the deeper principles. So I guess the question I have is this this universal structure of progression basically reliant on the difficulty, or is it emergent from the difficulty that a beginner in a field has in discerning what actually matters or how kind of things relate to one another? Or why do you think that we see this universal progression? Why does it not happen in one way in one field and perhaps in another way in another field?
I think this is, or at least my theory, or my working principle that the practical mastery system is based on, is the idea that this is a universal, it's sort of the universal mechanism of how we learn and transmit information, or skills or knowledge. So, as an example, music, I think, is a good kind of way to frame this, so that it gives people some concrete idea of what I'm talking about. So in the beginning, if you don't know anything about music, the first thing you do is learn how to read music, right? You learn the scales, you learn the notes, which note is what. Okay, this is an A, this is a G, this is a B flat, whatever. You and then you learn where that note goes on your instrument, whether it's piano or a trumpet, or a guitar, or whatever. It You then learn, okay, this is where I need to place my fingers. You learn the physical skills involved in this. This is the fingering of this particular thing. Here is the chord on the guitar. Here are the keys on the keyboard. This one is a C, this one is a, a D sharp or a, an E flat. And so you have to learn those basic things first, those basic physical skills, those basic theoretical skills first. You can't play music, you can't play a song until you learn those skills. So you have to have that structured learning of those basic skills first. There has to be a foundation. Because if you don't have the foundation, all you're doing is making noise. So, and this applies in any other field. You can't become an engineer. You can't just build an electronic device if you don't know basic math. You're just going to throw a bunch of parts together that aren't going to work. So that basic structure is something that's fundamental to every field of study. There are basic concepts, there are basic ideas, there are basic skills in every single field of study, every field of endeavor. And in order to practice that field or become proficient in that field, you have to learn the basics first. You can't jump ahead. The problem is, or one of the issues that we see these days is what I've heard referred to as Kung Fu Panda syndrome. And the idea, I don't know if you've seen the movie Kung Fu Panda. The idea being that this panda loves kung fu and wants to study kung fu and because he wants to do it so much, even though he's not really trained, he is able to succeed. And this idea that you can, if you wish it hard enough, you can be successful at something, even if you don't have any skills, even if you don't know anything about it, is an idea that's pushed a lot. I mean, it's something you see a lot in culture, and a lot of people seem to have this idea that if I just want to be something bad enough, I don't have to do any work to make it happen. It'll just happen. But traditionally, this is not the case. I mean, anybody who's developed any skill in anything at all understands that if you don't learn the basics, you can't do the advanced stuff. You can't play jazz on a saxophone if you don't know how to use a saxophone and you can't read music. So, or you
Yeah.
don't know what the scales are. So this appears to be a universal process. That one of the other interesting insights that I had was, or as this developed, was that as I said, the actual process itself seems to be identical. But because each of these fields, whether we're talking about medicine or engineering or martial arts, because instructors, because masters of these fields are so focused on teaching the actual skills and the knowledge of the field itself, the process of that teaching is implicit, but it's never been explicitly sort of pulled out. And that's what I'm attempting to do here. That's what practical mastery attempts to do, is to make this implicit process of behavioral development and knowledge transfer explicit. So, and then once people learn the method, or they learn that process, then it can be applied to whatever aspect of life they choose, not just professionally, not just for hobbies like music or fishing or riding motorcycles or whatever. It can also be applied to parenting or relationships. So once the method is learned, it can be applied to any aspect. So the my initial thinking, or the initial kind of premise of this, was that it was a method that somebody who is successful in one aspect of their lives, whether it be business or academic or whatever, who has gone through that process of learning a skill or mastering a, even as to the point of mastering a skill, who may not who may have other aspects of their lives where they're not as successful, could then learn this method that they've already been through, even though they didn't really realize it, and then apply it to other aspects of their lives where they may not be as successful, or where they want to be more successful.
Right. In your explorations around this, have you looked into kind of what the academic literature says, or kind of what the existing developmental psychology kind of world, for example, says, or are you mostly attempting to kind of apply a natural law method to kind of green field, or yeah?
So a little bit of both. The basic development started with this basic premise that the method itself was, the process itself was universal regardless of field, and then digging into these different aspects, and looking at things like martial traditions, military training, medieval guilds, where a lot of this developed, um, music instruction, classical musical instruction, and finding the aspects of that fit together. Um, this is something that I've been working on with Coach Noah Ravoy. He's been extremely helpful, and actually one of the things uh, that he suggested, which was a very interesting idea, and turned into something that has become kind of a foundation, is using the hero's journey as a template for human behavioral change. And interestingly enough, it actually maps pretty closely with the process that seems to apply in all cases. There are some differences. One of the main ones between the hero's journey in literary terms or mythological terms is that in probably about half the cases, the hero ends up beginning this journey, or beginning this hero's path, accidentally, or without conscious decision to do so. They just find themselves in a place where this process sort of starts without them really doing anything. Whereas in practical mastery, or this the process of mastery, it has to be a conscious decision on the participant's part to begin and continue the journey. So um, it's it's vitally important that a person who is starting a path of mastery, regardless of the field, makes a conscious decision and accepts responsibility for the cost of that process.
Mhm.
Otherwise, they're not going to be successful.
Right. I guess one way of trying to make it square with hero's journey is to understand the initial starting point as the creation of the relevance of the skill in
Hmm.
the hero's life, and then the actual obstacle being the pressure on him to actually make that decision, because something
Yeah.
matters enough that you actually want to pay the price. I guess that's a good point as well, in general, that a lot of times when we develop capacity, either there's a strong enough pressure in our life that we're essentially forced to develop that skill or capacity, or and this is often, I think, where this confusion comes in. The decision, in some sense, has already been made for us, whether it be by our parents or by society, or by kind of the general life script that is expected of members of a society. And then if it works well, then great, that you don't really have to make the conscious decision necessarily. But if it doesn't, the confusion comes in that I was told that this was the way you do it, and I chose to accept that. Maybe I made a deliberate choice to accept it, but then it didn't work out, and now I'm stuck with this kind of helplessness because all of the external structures took care of creating the progression for me rather than me deliberately deciding to enact a progression towards something. I think this is something that I, in my own life, have also seen when I exited the school environment and then progressed into kind of more and more practical application in the real world and professional life. One thing I noticed is that a lot of the structures that were external in the school environment, I had to kind of pull inside of myself. For
Hmm.
example, in school, our schedule is largely taken care of by the institution. The 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 assignment of what to do when is taken care of by other people. The buffet of available options is taken care of by other people, by the institution. So what we learn, or what we probably are forced to learn, especially as we take on responsibility not only for perhaps our professional progression, but for uh, enacting outcomes, or arriving at outcomes that we want in our life across the different domains, is to take full responsibility for making those specific choices. Like, okay, what is on offer as to the training things, that the training programs that might be out there related to a professional goal that I have, or what are the kind of people I might want to put myself around to develop relationships that might advance my interests. So the pulling in of structure that's otherwise external is, I think, is a very important piece. Now, in your work here, have you encountered kind of any number of perhaps prevailing misunderstandings that people have about how to progress to mastery? Like, what's the top three or top five things that people seem to be confused about as to how to actually develop skills and mastery?
So, as I mentioned, this sort of prevailing idea that you don't have to do any work, you can just sort of jump to the end, I think is, a dangerous and difficult one to get around, because people want the benefits, but they don't want to do the work to get to the benefits. They don't want to experience the cost. And that's one of the most important aspects of any journey in, in terms of, or any process in terms of learning a skill and becoming proficient, and then good at it, is that there is always cost involved, because any sort of behavioral transition or behavioral development is costly. It's costly in terms of you know mental energy, of neurological energy, of creating new neural pathways for those new skills. So all of these things, going from a very basic physiological level, you know, the brain is expensive. The brain uses lots of energy. It requires lots of energy to function. And when you make changes to the brain, that's even more expensive. So making changes to neurological to these neural pathways, um, myelinating uh, new neurons and that kind of stuff, that requires resources. There is a cost. There's also a psychological cost, because it means that when you learn a new skill or choose to become something that you are not currently, there is also a cost in terms of changing your identity. Now, there are schools that, there are methods or programs of behavioral change that focus on changing identity first, where okay, I'm a non-smoker now. And then you convince yourself that you're a non-smoker, and then you do the things that you need to do to become a non-smoker. You stop smoking, or you say, I'm a musician now, and so you start doing the things that musicians do. But the problem is, this tends to not be all that effective. It's the same kind of thing as people who use motivation as a tool, as the main tool for behavioral change. Motivation is an emotion. Identity tends to be emotionally, tied to emotion, and unfortunately, those emotions sort of run out of steam eventually. So having structure that's built in that allows you to do specific actions at specific times provides you with the ability to change behavior. And then as behavior changes, identity changes. So the actual action itself, the structure produces identity, not the other way around. The process produces identity. Again, motivation is helpful. It a lot of times will get you moving in the right direction, but it's not enough for sustained behavioral change. You have to have structure. And oftentimes, once you are successful in that within that structure, and your behavior changes reliably over time, you become even more motivated because you have shown yourself that you can be trusted to make changes. So one of the things that or one of the aspects of the Love Your Liver program, or excuse me, of the Practical Mastery program, another project I work on, Love Your Liver. But the one of the aspects that we discuss in Practical Mastery is that for many of us, we have gone through periods where we have broken promises to ourselves, where we said, I'm going to do this, and then we don't do it. And, maybe they're small promises, maybe they're bigger promises. But when we break promises to ourselves, we stop trusting ourselves, just as when other people break promises to us, we stop trusting them. So by using this structure to make workable the idea of keeping promises to yourself, small workable promises that you can make and keep to yourself, over time, when you can do those things reliably, you rebuild trust in yourself, and in that process you create this new image of this person that you have wanted to be but have not been successful at becoming. So I think I might have got a little off topic there, but
No, that's good. That's good. I was gonna jump in on the motivation part. I myself have spent some time over the past 2 years going deep on a related subject that also deals in structure, which is structure dynamics. This is by the musical composer and organizational consultant Robert Fritz, and he comes from musical composition and has a kind of classical training in that, and so he takes a lot of the elements or things he's learned in there and puts it into the work. But one of the things that he talks about that has been quite helpful to understand is when we have mixed motivations for something. And for example, we might have a belief about ourselves or about the world. Like, for example, I'm weak, or the world is dangerous, or any number of similar things that then create a kind of basic interpretive template for how we believe the world to be and how to interpret events and actions that happen or we take inside of it. And when we embark on a new on the development of a new skill or on the achievement of a new desire, and when we start having success with that, and the success of doing that starts to conflict with our basic interpretation or belief about ourselves or about the world, effectively, we are by the structure of our belief and by the structure of our belief and our motivation, we are then pulled away from the success back into making true what our basic belief about the world says or is. And so there's this image that he uses a lot, which is this idea of rubber bands that are connected between your body and one side of the room, and another one between your body and the other side of the room, let's say, as a basic image. And so when you're in a structure like that, where you're in the middle, you have two anchor points on either side of you, and you are attached to both anchor points with rubber bands, when you get close to the one of the sides, the tension that pulls you towards that side that you're closest to is the least strong. But the tension in the direction of the other thing that you're still attached to is the strongest. And so inevitably the structure is going to pull you away again from what you were close to back to the other thing, because that's the point of highest tension. And structure seeks equilibrium. And so one of the primary methods that he practices in his structural consultations with people is to make them aware of, or discover rather, the beliefs or conclusions that they hold about reality or themselves, and to acknowledge them, they kind of teach themselves that in reality they are there, but they don't have to be part of the structure of achieving something. You can acknowledge that they are a thing you believe, but if you know that it's a belief you have rather than how reality is, because none of us really know ultimately in all ways how reality is, then we can exit, we can remove it from the structure, and we can just exist in the structural tension between the desired outcome and our current reality, and then moving from current reality to the desired outcome. So in this sense, this is what structural dynamics teaches, that the primary thing you want to establish is structural tension between where you are and where you want to be, and to be extremely clear and articulate about what that actual thing is that you want. Because a lot of the time we confuse certain ideas we have about the world or about what we think we want with what we actually want, because it's socially expected, or it is perhaps a status signal. And so have you in your work discovered kind of some of these psychological elements that come in and prevent people from attaining mastery in this respect, or yeah, how does the psychological dimension fit into that?
So yes, it's a big part of everything, because obviously the way we look at the world, the way we see ourselves within the world, affects our behavior. So if we want to change our behavior, that necessarily means that some alteration of our identity, of the beliefs that we have of our perceived place in the world, is going to change. And there's cost associated with that. So taking responsibility, being willing to pay that cost, is part of the issue. And that can be very difficult emotionally. So a couple of aspects of the practical mastery program that apply in that aspect. One is being able to separate specific behavior, from the interpretation of that behavior. So taking for example, say the behavior that you want to change, or what you want to change to is, I'm going to walk from 7 a.m. until 7:30 a.m. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. That's a very specific, very concrete behavior. So when you document that behavior as part of the practical mastery program, you would document Monday walked from 7 a.m. to 7:30. Tuesday walked from 7 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. Wednesday did not walk did not walk. The narrative that a lot of people would put on that is, well, I had this going on and I had to do this, and that's why I didn't walk. Within the practical mastery program, the why is less important. We want people to document just the facts about what's going on rather than making interpretations or narratives around those things, because the narratives, the stories that we tell ourselves about our actions are the things that tend to cause us to not to fall back or to not be successful. If we focus on simply documenting the actions themselves, it provides us with a much more, it takes away the emotion and allows us to analyze what exactly is happening in terms of those things and make changes that don't necessarily threaten us emotionally. We're simply saying, okay, this happened, but this didn't happen. Here are the changes that I need to make sure that it does happen, the way that I have chosen to make it happen within the structure. So by removing the narratives associated with the behavior, that actually permits us to function and change those behaviors in a much more reliable way, because we're not attaching blame. We're not attaching, I'm a bad person because I didn't do this. It's simply, okay, I did it for 2 days and then I didn't do it that third day. From here on, I'm going to try to do it every day. If something happens and I feel sick, you build contingencies in as well to the structure, so that if you're not able to do the full 30 minutes, you walk for 5 minutes, so that you're not improvising. Every contingency is accounted for so that you can function. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to make decisions. You just follow the plan.
In some sense, what I'm hearing out of this is that by removing the psychological or kind of decision-making load, and by placing extreme emphasis on the determination of what enacting this behavioral change will actually look like structurally in your own life, you're effectively making the difficulty of then enacting it in the moment lower, and you're continuously returning the attention of the practitioner back to the fundamental commitment that they are made or have made, or that they're making again, as well as their ability to determine whether the structure that they realize is actually necessary for this to happen actually currently fits into their life. Right? Like, it might be that the life that they are living at present does not afford a particular form of the commitment or a particular form of the structure to take place, because they are under too strong a load from multiple different angles. But what they might be able to do is to compress the load that the structure they imagine they could enact down to a manageable size, and then reap the rewards of the consistency over time. And then as their life perhaps changes, circumstances change, they might be able to expand the available energy or time they can dedicate to it.
Exactly right. So within the program, the participant chooses a specific aspect that they wish to change at the beginning of the program. And then they focus simply on that one thing, that one behavior that they wish to change, or that one aspect of their behavior that they wish to change. And if they meet resistance, and at some point everybody meets resistance in making behavioral change. It's part of the process. But if the case is that the scope of what they wish to change is too large for what they're able to do, then the instruction is always to scale back to the point where they can manage it, where it is a manageable thing that they can do every day or that they can do on a regular basis.
Right.
And if that's exactly what we want, is for people to be able to have one specific behavior, even if it's something really small, that they're able to do consistently, because it's the consistency that matters. It's not the scope of the specific behavior. It's the consistency in doing it over and over again. And again, learning, experiencing reliable behavioral change, which then allows you to build upon that. So in later stages of the program, you can expand that once you're getting closer to that journeyman stage, and working your way to the later stages of the apprentice stage. You can start accepting more responsibility. You can start expanding on that behavior to add maybe one more behavior on top of that, that will strengthen that change that you're moving towards. So the other aspect of things, in terms of emotions, which is something that we do address directly, is that most people, or many people, allow emotions to determine behavior. They make decisions about what they do based on their emotions. Now, there are times where this may be appropriate, but in terms of producing long-term reliable behavioral change, this is not helpful, because emotions tend to change pretty rapidly. So within the Practical Mastery program, we treat emotions as information. It provides us, when we have an emotional response to something, to a behavioral change that we're trying to make, that's usually a sign of resistance, and typically that's an indication that we're confronting a cost of change. And a lot of times it may be an overt cost. It's like, okay, I know I'm going to start exercising more. I'm going to start lifting weights, which means that I'm going to be physically sore after a workout. That's an explicit, upfront cost of making the change. I'm going to have to pay however much a month for a gym membership to be able to do this. That's an upfront cost. But there are also hidden costs, what we call shadow costs. And that is the cost of not doing it. What will it cost if I don't do this? And it may be, well, I might develop diabetes or heart disease later on down the road, or I'm not going to be able to go on hikes with my children. So most people, when they have an emotional reaction, are usually running up against that realization of cost, either a shadow cost or an actual upfront cost. So by treating emotional responses as information rather than the driving force in determining behavior, it allows you to continue along the path and to make those costs explicit. And then the person can make a decision about whether they're willing to pay that cost or not. Because if you are not willing to pay the cost, then you're not going to make the change. Everything costs. And we make those costs explicit. And once you understand what the costs are, both the explicit costs, the things that it's going to cost you, as well as the shadow costs of what it's going to cost to not do that, to not change that behavior, then you can make a much more rational decision about whether this is an appropriate change or not.
Right. I guess you have an opportunity to have a deeper commitment than one that you would have if you weren't fully aware of the costs that you pay either way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So resistance is part of the program. There are failure points all along the way, but by understanding them, by looking at them, and by seeing what those things, and any sort of resistance is almost always going to be confrontation of cost. And at that point, you can make the decision, okay, here's what this is costing me. I'm willing to pay that cost. So I'm going to continue doing what I'm, continuing making this change, or I don't want to pay that cost. So I'm not, I'm going to stop. And, failure is always an option, or quitting is always an option. But generally speaking, for most behaviors, the shadow costs in the long run are far more expensive than the upfront costs of making change.
Right. They're just not accessible to us in the moment of the
Right.
behavior
I mean,
itself.
it's you either pay up front or you pay on the back end.
Right.
And for most behavioral, for most behaviors, it's going to cost you much more if you pay it on the back end rather than being willing to pay the cost up front of making those changes that need to be made or you choose to make.
Right.
But within the program, personal responsibility, being willing to pay the cost, and that's those people who are willing to make those calls, who are willing to pay those costs, who are willing to make we're willing to take responsibility for their own changes. Those people will be successful. People who are not willing to make those, who are not willing to take responsibility or not willing to pay costs, are not going to be successful at making changes in their life, behavioral changes.
Right. So you've explored this topic, you've discovered a number of these principles, you continue to explore it and write about it on the Substack so that people have an opportunity to find out more about it, to understand it, perhaps to even apply it themselves. But you're actually building towards something here, an actual program. Is that
Yes.
already existing? Is it something that's coming in the future? And what are
No,
your sort of
it's
ambitions
in
of it
place.
and the
So
structure of it?
yeah. So in addition to the Substack, which is a basic explanation of the fundamentals of the practical mastery system, the methodology. There is also a 12-week self-directed practical mastery course that's available at practical-mastery.com. So you can go to the website. It's pretty informative. Go through the information, and then if you choose to, if you want to try the program, there is a self-directed program that you can sign up for, and if you complete that and you wish to go further, you can submit an application. Submit your because there's documentation at the end of each week, and you can submit that documentation and submit an application. There is then a 6-week what we call a qualification gauntlet, and the idea of this gauntlet is to make sure that you understand how to document correctly, how to document accurately, and you can follow these behavioral changes. You can make you can document or demonstrate that you can follow the program and make behavioral changes. And then if once you finish the gauntlet, you can then apply for the actual 12-week practical mastery apprentice cohort program. It's a live program that we would do weekly, a 12-week program with between 5 and 10 other people that would go more deeply into these skills, would at this point, I would be the instructor. Eventually, I will have an instructor course so that other people that who have graduated through this program can learn how to teach practical mastery if they choose to. But one of the things that's important to understand is that at each step, a person has to demonstrate their ability to progress, and not everybody is, participation is not enough. You have to actually be able to perform to
Right.
move on to the next step. So this program is not for everyone. You must be willing to take responsibility for your actions. You must be willing to follow the program, to document it accurately, and to move forward. So it's not everybody is capable of doing that. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. This is for a committed minority of people.
Gotcha. The capable few, if you will.
Yes, the capable few. Absolutely.
So do I understand correctly then that this is essentially, it's not really about any particular behavior change that you might enact during the program, but it's about essentially learning the capacity to direct your own behavior change in any domain, really, and to use specific behavioral changes you make during the program as the kind of demonstration to yourself and to the evaluation method, if you will, that you are capable of it. And then once you graduate, essentially, you now have the skill set to apply this to musical learning, to parenting, to any number of domains. So I can kind of see the appeal here being something that being that you're not really learning, oh, I'm going to be a musician by the end, or I'm going to be able to play this song, or I'm going to be, I'm going to have done this particular thing, but rather I have structured my own life and my energy and attention and effort in a repeatable way that I can now apply to anything I choose to go after. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes, that's exactly what the program does. It teaches this, what seems to be a fundamental or a universal process of behavioral development and knowledge transmission. So the later stages of the program, we start talking about how to transmit the knowledge that you have to others. So eventually there will be a journeyman practitioner course for people who have a specific field of expertise and they want to learn how to teach that field better, as well as a practical mastery instructor course, which will be specifically for people who wish to learn to teach the practical mastery methodology.
Got it.
But the idea is that by learning the actual process itself, yes, you can apply it to any aspect of your life, any field that you choose to do. And what an actual master is someone, because this path to mastery, or this path of mastery, is not a linear path. It's not going from point A to point B, going from apprentice or beginner to master. It's a spiral path. So each time you complete a cycle of this path, you now are at a higher level of responsibility, a higher level of skill, and you can then apply those to even higher levels of skill and transmission of these things to others. Because if a system isn't transmissible to other people, then it's only then when that person ceases to exist, when they die or when they retire, then all that knowledge is lost. It has to be passed on. And
Right.
that's part of that path of mastery as well, is eventually, once you've learned it, once you've embodied it, you learn to transmit it, to pass it on. So that's an aspect that's also taught.
What I'm realizing is that on some level, this, I could see this becoming a kind of core skill that everybody is taught as something that to some extent could replace university, at least on the level of, well, I'm thinking that in this new world of omnipresent AI and extremely fast changes in the external environment, the one skill that stays relevant, whatever you do, is the ability to direct yourself in the direction of what you want, and the ability to replicate that in yourself and in others. So, and on some level, this is kind of the universal valuable skill. So I can see that being valuable.
Yeah, it's and universal is is maybe a bit of a questionable term. I can't say for with any degree of certainty that this works in every possible situation. In within every field, within every circumstance, but the fact that there are so many similarities between different fields that have produced reliable excellence over hundreds or thousands of years is a really strong indication that this method, that this process is hardwired into us. And so the innovation, if there is one, is for me was the insight that okay, this appears to be the same method, the same process, regardless of field, but also kind of pulling it out, making this implicit process explicit, so then people can use it and apply it to any aspect of their lives that they choose to. And this is still just getting started, so I don't have data yet as to how effective it is, but I'm, I've I've applied it in my own experience, and just developing the process has actually been a kind of a cycle or a spiral of this learning process.
Right.
So I know it applies in my case, and like I said, I've experienced this in many different aspects of my own life and seen it work and for other people as well. So I feel strongly, or I have enough evidence, sort of baseline evidence or indications that this should be very effective for people. So if you've tried other things and they haven't worked, you've tried other ways of changing behavior that haven't worked, this might be something that works for you. If you're willing to take responsibility, if you're willing to pay the cost.
Right.
But my recommendation is anyone who's interested, read the Substack articles. That's sort of the initial gateway. It doesn't cost anything. I don't do paid subscriptions on Substack. All the articles are free. If you find that if someone finds they make a connection with it and wish to learn more, they can go to the website practical-mastery.com. Read through the information on the website. If you choose to, then you can purchase the 12-week self-directed course. Take the course. If you wish to proceed further, then you can do so. I just want to say, participation is not a guarantee of being able to proceed. You have to demonstrate your ability to move forward.
Great. Well, I appreciate you coming on and explaining your observations and attempt to structure this perhaps universal but definitely widely applicable process. I am quite interested to see how this develops, and will be in touch with you about driving this forward. I
Wonderful.
myself am also offering to people who are listening to this, and I will make a post about this as well, free structural consultations. This is not the same thing that Nathan is describing here, but it is something that I myself am currently pursuing after having gone through Robert Fritz's structural dynamics course and being on the way to certification as a structural consultant. And so if you yourself have a particular a desire that you're after and you're wondering about how to attain it, and specifically if you've in the past, as I think we all have, had the experience of attaining something you were after and then losing it again, I would invite you to reach out to me via DM or email. You can go to moritzbieling.com or email me with moritzbieling@hey.com, or also on X, you can send me a DM. And I'd be happy to do a free structure consultation with you. And perhaps what turns out from that is that you need to learn how to become a master in something, or master the mastery process. So again, thank you for coming on, Nathan, and I look forward to...
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Sounds good. All right. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.